Hello and welcome to the FMCC webinar, Evolving FM in Saudi Arabia. It's old, it's new, it's different, presented by Stephen Brown. Everyone has been muted for audio quality and this webinar is being recorded. If you do have any questions during the webinar, please type them into the chat box and we'll go over them during the Q&A portion at the end of the webinar. Next slide, please. And a copy of this PDF of the PowerPoint will also be made available after the webinar as well. Next slide, please. The FMCC does provide many services from the FM community, such as Ask the Expert, Find a Consultant, Locate a Speaker, and online educational resources. You may find more information at their website, fmcc.ifma.org. Next slide, please. And we also like to take the time to thank our sponsors. And next slide, please. I also like to take this time to remind everyone, after the webinar, there is a post-webinar survey. The board does anxiously await and read those results after, so I do encourage you to take a moment out of your time at the end and complete that complete that survey. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, at this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Stephen. Stephen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Joshua. And thank you all for linking in. It's planned that I'm going to present for about 30 minutes while I display some slides and photos. Afterward will be an opportunity for questions, as Josh mentioned. At the end, I'm also going to provide my contact information. As an introduction, I'm the principal consultant and training facilitator for FM-adviso. And by the end of this presentation, you're going to recognize that there's been focus on 6 words that describe the delivery of facility management in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. There's a difference, there's been an evolution, there's a new awareness, there are opportunities, you must have an understanding, and there's an impact. FM-adviso provides a global consulting for a broad range of FM operations, as well as providing training for IFMA, Disaster Recovery Institute, and other training programs. My career has spanned about 25 years in support of academic, corporate, and government sites. I'm a member of a number of organizations and qualified to deliver training for most of the credentials I hold. To begin, I want to point out that the experience that I had in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is limited to working at one site for a 4.5-year period. It was challenging and it was rewarding, and I would rate it a very positive experience. And it was my curiosity of the country and its people and its culture that resulted in my studies to understand how the built environment developed. My background can give you some of the personal perspective. My FM experience originated with U.S. organizations. Over the years, the portfolio expanded into the UK and across Europe. The common position was these were all considered progressive and Western-oriented. I then took a 5-year assignment in the Caribbean, and this is where I got my first taste of a less developed FM system and operations. It was this experience that prepared me well for working in the Kingdom, where one can find sites with a 19th century operation right next door to the absolute latest in technology. To help with the presentation, I want to give you a touch of background about the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. 500 years ago, the Arabian Peninsula contained various trade routes that crossed regions that were occupied by various tribal factions. This map displays the areas that were known by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Over time, the areas changed and they were controlled by Turks, Egyptians, and others. This map displaying the Arabian Peninsula in 1914, you can see that it continued to be divided into areas where there were still nomadic tribal factions. You can even see the section there toward the center that was ruled by the House of Saud. In the 1920s, American oil company representatives proposed an agreement with some of those tribal leaders. In short, if the leader could get the various tribes to come together and form a united and stable government, this oil industry would come and explore, locate, drill, and develop the industry for the kingdom. The agreement was struck in 1933, and oil has been flowing to the kingdom's economy since 1938. The national oil company, Saudi Aramco, is the world's most valuable company, valued, estimated around US $5 to $7 trillion. For calendar 2013, the kingdom ended with a budget surplus of $520 billion. I reference this to give indication of scale with regard to the kingdom's finances, but it has not always been that way. Indeed, it has recently changed with the drop in oil prices. Into the 1970s, most Saudis lived a very simple lifestyle, and there were few formal education options. Into the 1950s, the population was 3 million, of which 80% lived in villages or were still nomadic. In the next 30 years, that population tripled, and that demographic changed from rural to urban. In the next 30 years, up to 2010, the population again tripled and continued its spiral upward, so that today 80% of Saudis live in metropolitan areas. Today, it's also noteworthy that half the population is under age 25, and almost 30% of the total population is comprised of foreign nationals. Now let's tie all this back to the built environment. Everyone is probably more familiar with the population growth in the Emirates. Dubai, for example, grew from 101,000 population in 1970 to 2.2 million today. But the growth in Saudi Arabia has been even greater. Riyadh, the capital, grew from a 1970 population of 408,000 to 3 million in the year 2000 and is 5.1 million today. In 1970, Jeddah was 348,000 people. By 2000, it had expanded to 1.8 million, and today is 3.4 million. The infrastructure of these cities has not been able to keep up with the growth. In the city of Jeddah, pictured today, almost 60% of the structures utilize septic tanks or other on-site waste handling. For many years, the waste was collected in tank trucks and dumped into a mountain valley. Imagine these huge buildings not serviced with a piped waste system. The trucks that hauled the waste into the mountain valley, they created a 50 million cubic meter lake. Today, the wastes are still collected, but there are proper treatment plants. It's also noteworthy that Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world in Dubai, was constructed without benefit of a sanitary waste system connected. As far as I'm aware, today they are still collecting the waste and pumping into trucks to haul away. The majority of the kingdom is a desert environment, and there are areas that have not recorded rain in more than 10 years. In the 4.5 years I was there, I experienced rain 4 times, and these varied from 19 to 50 millimeters. The natural swales, or valleys, the wadis, channel the infrequent rainwater toward the sea. It was not until 2000 that civil works for the installation of storm sewers began in Jeddah. Even with these works, it was reported that more than 1,000 people drowned due to rain-sourced flooding in one event. Over 40% of the deaths were in highway underpasses on city streets. The flooding was the result of 85 millimeters, that's 3.3 inches of rain that fell over a 4.5-hour period. It was later revealed that stormwater projects had not really been completed and that buildings had been allowed to be constructed in the wadis. As a result of corruption trials, a number of persons went to prison or worse. For potable water, in the kingdom, it comes from desalination plants. There are no rivers and there's very little rainfall, as I mentioned. Plus, the desert environment results in high consumption. Per capita consumption in the kingdom is about 265 liters or 70 gallons a day. That's double the worldwide average. More than 40% of the residential buildings in Jeddah do not have a piped-in water source, but have tanks that receive deliveries from a huge fleet of tank trucks that clog the city streets. About 18% of the world's desalination capacity is found in the 30 water plants that are in Saudi Arabia. There are plans to double the capacity in the next decade. The capital city of Riyadh, with a population over 5 million, receives its water that is pumped 470 kilometers, almost 300 miles from the Persian Gulf. The kingdom had experienced a massive construction boom time in the 1970s and 80s as the population migrated to the urban centers. Infrastructure challenges were significant. For example, the consumption of electricity doubled in the 15 years from 1975 to 1990. It doubled again from 1990 to 2005. 1990 to 2005, and was still on track again to double before government stepped in and instituted programs for conservation and reducing the consumption. Compared to the rest of the world, Saudi Arabia consumes 2 to 3 times per capita the amount of electricity, and it is burning almost 25% of the oil it produces to meet the demand. Looking at the graph between 1976 and 2009, you can see there's a huge impact. Now let me tie this built environment introduction into my experience in Saudi. I was posted at King Abdullah University of Science and Technology. The university is a 560,000 square meter, that's 6 million square feet, of academic and research institute. When it opened in 2009, it was the world's largest LEED Platinum project. Aside from the university, this greenfield development on the Red Sea includes over 4,000 residential units, student housing, schools, retail, recreation, parks, marina, and more. A small city was built. Currently, a new research park is under construction and will add another 6 million square feet to the built environment of KAUST. The university currently employs just short of 5,000 people from 105 countries around the world. Additionally, there are about 5,000 contracted workers who provide the services, the maintenance, and the operation to run this small city. KAUST is located on the shores of the Red Sea, about 75 kilometers north of Jeddah, 48 miles. Even with the benefit of the cooling breezes from the sea and the proximity to the hills that provide cooler breezes in the afternoon, you have more moderate temperatures, but the summer highs can still reach over 50 degrees or 122 degrees Fahrenheit. As mentioned previously, that with only 4 rain events, there isn't a lot of cooling provided in the environment naturally. The university and its supporting community were designed by professional architects and engineers, and it was programmed to employ a proper facility management scheme. It has, however, been challenging to realize service contractor organizations in the kingdom that were capable to fulfill the requirements based on Western standards of FM and on the scale that was required. In the kingdom, the concept of facility management as a holistic asset management scheme is still evolving and developing. It wasn't too many years ago that if you mentioned FM, it was most often viewed as the most basic maintenance. That is, cleaning, the lights are working, and the temperature is comfortable, period. It's been very slow to evolve. The built environment in the kingdom can be broken down into 4 categories in its diversity. First, you have the age structures that were built from early times up to the latter third of the 20th century. Second, there were facilities constructed in the 70s and 80s. They were constructed quickly, they're hugely inefficient, and often they've not benefited from the most basic maintenance schemes. They were almost considered a consumable item. They were not built with efficiency in mind, and the lack of preventive maintenance and retrofit updates has resulted in many of them to be rendered functionally obsolete. Third, you started moving into the mindset change that facilities constructed between 1990 and 2005 were much better designed. They had improved mechanical systems, but they were still not constructed for energy efficiency, and insulation was often an afterthought. Maintenance has improved, but often remained mired in those past strategies. Beginning around 2000, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia advanced with global influence and increased awareness to result in a big shift toward efficiency, improving the maintenance schemes, and a goal for extended care and stewardship of the built facilities. Recognizing the need to become more integrated with their energy industry, there's been a shift from the petroleum production focus to one of full energy management. Hundreds, literally hundreds of LEED projects are underway, and high-efficiency residential communities are under construction to reverse some of the urbanization. Additionally, there are massive investments being made in energy efficiency research. The government of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has been very proactive to establish their own standards instead of continuing to remain under governing principles of other countries. This includes creation of codes, regulations, guidelines, and more. It's been a matter of national pride as well as a keen desire to personalize courses of action that are particular for their country, for their culture, and for their environment. Some of the standards are very well defined and mature. Others are still developing and will continue to evolve. Another key aspect of facility management in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia relates to the technicians who support, operate, and maintain the sites. In this regard, there's been a definitive lag in the awareness, the knowledge, and the skills that has contributed to a decline in those assets. Much of this has evolved from how contract labor was selected for services. The Kingdom has historically contracted facilities service and support. These firms hire expatriates for labor because the costs are a lot less and they give the vendor more flexibility and resource allocation. Recall that I mentioned that 30% of the population in the Kingdom is made up of foreign nationals. This group contains the majority of construction labor, janitors, and other building maintenance workers. They originate from Egypt and the Levant, which includes Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and Turkey. From Southern Asia, including India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Thailand, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, and Nepal, and also a good many of workers from the Philippines. Generally, these are countries where economies and wages are very depressed. There are some very skilled tradesmen and technicians, but there are many others who are not. These are simply persons who have traveled far from home in search of wages to support their families. The maintenance contractors often recruit these persons en masse and with less concern about qualifications. The workers are generally toiling 6 and 7 days a week. They live in close quarter compounds where most aspects of their lives are very well controlled. Contractors are starting to evolve toward proper facility management, but there's much progress yet to be made. Saudi Aramco, the national oil company, and other multinational companies are propelling change. And it's also very noteworthy that the Saudi government-supported operations are the vanguard. The private sector is going to require more time to realize their needed changes. Contracts are another area where the evolution has been moving erratically. Construction techniques and building systems are no longer regional considerations. The designs take the regional environment into account, but the materials and systems are sourced globally. The maintenance standards in the kingdom have become the same as other parts of the world, and so the contracts have also evolved to become less of a legacy and more aligned to global format. It is again unfortunate that contractors and many of the expatriate workers do not have full comprehension of performance contracts, nor the strategic aspect of facility management. This is further made difficult when a portfolio has a building with a legacy system where a decision has been made to run to failure, right next to a building that is more current and has well-defined preventive and predictive schemes mated to well-documented equipment histories. A facility manager in the kingdom has to be very well versed to appreciate the vast differences and to have a defined strategy to transition operations to be current in the industry. Again, citing the more limited experiences of some of the expatriate workers, they're not aware of the current maintenance strategies, and they do not appreciate the rationale for accurate schedules, precision of measures, and attention to details. While their management may be becoming aware, the quality and verification and inspection programs very often are not at the standard that one would expect. The facility manager should ensure keen attention on the results and to reinforce quality assurance and quality control training programs. Since the contractor manager may not share your same focus, it can become a study in diplomacy and contract enforcement. Then there's the matter of safety. To start, the home countries that I mentioned prior are not renowned for their safety programs. Quite a number of the workers have not had the benefit of safety programs that include basic personal protective equipment and risk awareness. It requires more attention, more instruction, more reminders, and more supervision. This lack of basic awareness must be overcome, and you have to have a requirement for controls to ensure protection of the individuals, the facilities, and the processes. Another aspect you must consider is the culture. This lack of training awareness, the fatigue, the relentless heat, and the diets can have an adverse impact on the workers. Finally, it relates to the workers' beliefs, many of whom are resigned to believe that their lives are predetermined. What will be, whether they function safely or not. Also recall I mentioned that about half of the kingdom is under age 25. On the right side of your screen, I'll contrast that to the US, where it's only 33% of the individuals who are under age 25. Since the year 2000, more than 70% of Saudi students have gone on to university. You can see a huge shift in the growth of their formal education. While they're securing their education, they're not able to gain the needed practical experience. There's simply not an adequate number of experienced adults with a base knowledge to be able to mentor and peer train as compared to Western countries. Again, citing the U.S. demographic, you can see the huge number of individuals in that 30 to 60 age group that simply doesn't exist in Saudi Arabia. Bottom line, the result is the learning process is different. Another key dynamic is that young Saudis are motivated to become managers and leaders. They're well educated. They are not keen to become tradesmen or technicians. This mindset is developed during the years of pay gaps with those lower paid technicians as compared to the higher pay and the developed self-image of a leader or manager. To overcome the gaps in experience, I suggest that standard operating procedures must be reviewed to become very basic and more all-encompassing. There's often a requirement for higher ratios of supervision or lead roles to instruct, to guide, and to ensure that tasks are completed properly. It's also important to note that the job market is very fluid and young Saudis are very mobile. Turnover can be higher and more effort is required to ensure retention. Even applying these ideas, the outputs are generally reduced when compared to Western sites. I will note the maintenance contractor with whom I worked is considered one of the top 3 in the kingdom, and yet the outputs were often 20% reduced compared to what was expected. Expatriate workers in the kingdom are required to have a government-issued residence permit, or what they call an IQAMA. Over the years, there have been many persons who have overstayed visitor visas or gained other entry to the country for employment purposes. About 2 years ago, there became an active government program to reduce the number of expat workers and to reduce the underemployment of Saudis. The first efforts involved a voluntary deportation of these illegal residents and included an amnesty program. Today, it's estimated that more than 2.1 million persons have left the kingdom under the program, many with amnesty, but others with arrest and deportation. Additionally, more professions are being labeled for Saudi only going forward. Existing IQAMAs are not being renewed or extended to force the turnover, and the new hires must be Saudi. It is my view that the available workforce will advance and improve, but it will be a slower pace than what is needed, what is desired. At best, it may be status quo and efficiency before the maintenance contractors find their way forward. The good news is I can point out that most of the countries that currently source the semi-skilled and skilled workers are working to improve their vocational training and education programs. These countries are also viewed as closer allies to the political structure in Saudi Arabia, and they will be the first to be permitted increased recruitment when the current limits are relaxed. The history of the kingdom involves many instances of an entrepreneurial spirit. The growth, the massive move from the rural to the urban areas, people have found a way to figure out how to get things done. A facility manager in Saudi Arabia must find the way to reward uncommon solutions, even as you're urging more change toward the common or the best practices. I would be remiss to not mention the cultural sensitivities of working in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Whether you work in Saudi or one of the other Gulf Cooperation Council countries, or elsewhere where Muslim staff are in larger numbers, there are some basics that you must be aware of. Saudi Arabia is an absolute monarchy, and it's the home of the 2 holy mosques of Islam. Saudi Arabian life incorporates every aspect of Islam, and it must be respected and recognized. There are 5 calls to prayer every day. Muslims are expected to attend the prayers. It's simply an aspect of the passing day, and it results in non-critical activities to be delayed or interrupted. It's a very positive attribute, and the tenets guide the believers to better lives. Attire is conservative for all persons in Saudi Arabia, including the expats. Some Saudi men wear Western-style clothes, but the thobe, that is an ankle-length shirt, is more common and is generally accompanied with a ghutra nagal to protect one's head from the sun. All ladies who venture out in public are expected to be adequately covered. Saudi women often wear an abaya, the long black robe, with a scarf over their head, and most Muslim women will typically wear a niqab to cover their faces. Saudi lives are very family-centric, and the extended family units are very common. Adult children generally remain living with their parents until they're married, and elder parents return to live with their adult children later in life. Evenings and weekends are very social and with the extended family and with friends. From a simple tea or coffee to grand meals, hospitality is very notable. I will strongly encourage that persons considering to work in Saudi Arabia to research the culture and the political status. That society has different rights and freedoms granted than does the West, and one must be aware. In closing, I mentioned 6 words early on. I'm going to review those now. And I'm going to tell you that living and working in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has to be approached as you would approach any travel. It's different. With all respect, many Americans have a reputation to expect the rest of the world to be the same as the USA. Regardless of your nationality, you have to accept that there are differences and accept the approach to FM will certainly reflect variations. It's different because it has evolved quickly to its current state. For success, you must accept that it is different. You can work with it as it exists, or you can determine what transformation is possible to a new state of being, working toward those best practices. Most of the portfolios in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia have legacy buildings as well as state-of-the-art technology. The facility manager must stay aware of the component differences and determine how to transition forward. The Kingdom is a fascinating country with amazing potential. I believe that Saudi Arabia and the Emirates are near the top in the pace of transition to a more progressive facility management industry. Many opportunities exist and many more will develop. As a matter of respect, one must develop the understanding of the cultural sensitivities that exist, and the facility manager must devote the time and effort to adhere to acceptable behaviors. Delivery of facility management in Saudi Arabia is a way that you can have an impact. You can make a difference in advancing the FM industry in a country that appreciates and acknowledges successful efforts. Thank you for your attention. Now let's see if there are any questions that I can answer.
Sure, we'll give them just a moment. If anybody does have any questions, please feel free and type them into the question box, and we will get to them momentarily. Give me just a minute to take care of that. While we're waiting for some questions, how long were you in Saudi Arabia, Stephen?
4.5 years.
Okay.
Went over in November of 2010 and exited at the beginning of June this year. I'll again point out the university where I was based, King Abdullah University of Science and Technology. It's www.kingabdullah.edu. www.kaust.edu.sa. It was an amazing project to build the greenfield development with the size and scale and the quality. I believe it was $14 billion project, and it was constructed very rapidly. It opened in 2009.
Someone's asking if the car and the camel was yours.
No, saw that one while I was fueling my car. I wished I spoke Arabic because I'd love to know how they backed that camel into the car.
Okay, we actually have a serious question now. So how are organizations changing to improve FM?
The biggest change that's undertaken is a focus on professionalism. IFMA, for example, has been delivering SFP, FMP training in the kingdom for the past 3 or 4 years, and that in its own right is getting everybody on the same page, as they say. It's getting people like-minded to understand the goal and to move it from a reactionary function to a more proactive, well-planned.
Great. Okay. At this time, I don't see any other questions. Can you go to the next slide, please? And then if anyone does think of any questions, Stephen's email was up there, and I'll be sending out a copy of the PowerPoint and a link to this recording later today. So feel free and certainly email any questions you come up with later. The FMCC does like to let everybody know of the councils that are out there and the sources of information that they are for everyone that is a member of IFMA. Next slide, please. And myself and the FMCC wants to thank everyone for taking their time out and joining us today for this great webinar. And Stephen, thank you very much for a very informative webinar. Everyone have a good holiday season.
My pleasure. Thank you, Joshua.
You're welcome.